Hello, students. This is Mrs. Moore, and I'm bringing you Constitutional Convention Lecture 3. Let's see, I have some different things I want to share with you, first of all, based on some grading that I did this week. So first of all, one thing that confused some of you, most of you, in your writing when we were talking about Kings Mountain patriots and the loyalists that were fighting there, and the fact that after the mountain men defeated the British very quickly within an hour of, it sounds like, intense violence, that the local mountain men there joined guerrilla bands. And many of you wrote guerrilla bands, and let me show you what you wrote. You wrote, oops, guerrilla bands. That's how you spelled it. So I have drawn some gorillas here, one playing the guitar. Then there's kind of a fat one with a pot belly. You can see, if you've missed my exceptional art skills, here they are for you. And they're singing their hit song, which is called Me Love Bananas. And then in the back it's like, me too, me love bananas. So I want to assure you that the mountain men did not form, they did not go out and find gorillas. There were not gorillas living in those mountains. They didn't give them instruments and train them to sing. This did not happen. Not guerrilla bands, okay? I will show you what did happen, though. Guerrilla bands, okay, which is derived from a Spanish word, guerrar, I believe, I know. That's what, saying it like that and understanding that is what 6 years of high school, college, middle school Spanish in Ohio will do for you. Guerrar. I know, you're impressed. So I think it means to fight or something with war. This is the kind of bands it is. Okay, a couple of you got that. And again, you're thinking about what you hear, and so you're spelling it that way. But understand there's a difference. So let's see exactly what guerrilla bands are. It's engaging in irregular warfare. And this is something that the Americans were good at because they had this terrain on their side of warfare as well, where they weren't just meeting in an open space to confront the British. That's not how it worked. So we see there are many colonists hiding in a tree and some bushes. They got their guns and they're hiding in the mountains, and the British are saying, do come out and fight. See? So it's not this, but it is this. Okay, so hopefully you'll remember that forever and always. It gave me some good chuckles, and then after a while I stopped laughing and got a little bit concerned. But something else. When you mentioned that to end the war, the British sued for peace, this is what some of you wrote. You wrote sewing for peace. And that's sewing as if with a needle and thread. See, there's a peace snake in the corner. He sewed a flag. He has sewn a flag with a peace symbol on it. And he says, I sure hope this peace blanket I made helps. And then his homie over here with the flowers says, it'll totally end the war, dude. And he's going to take flowers to the soldiers because we know peace flags and flowers always end wars. So you are not sewing for peace. You are suing for peace. See? And here is a British soldier waving a white flag saying, oh, quite finished, you win. And the American soldier there, who appears to be naked and have arms growing out of his chin, says, let's end this. I'll get my lawyer. So it is a legal way to end peace, drawing up documents, not just going home to dinner, being done with it. So again, we do not sew for peace. We sue for peace. Hopefully that's something you also won't forget for a while. All right. And now to things of the present. All right. The main things we want to talk about today are ending the Constitutional Convention, which means submitting the Constitution to the states for ratification, what ratification means, how that worked. And we also need to talk about a big ideological fight hear one of my children singing upstairs. A big ideological fight or disagreement between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So these are the things we're going to talk about today. And if we were to have a large leading question, let's see, it's what were the main disagreements of the Constitutional Convention? That's a question. And then how does this draft, this plan of government, become the law of the land? So those are the questions we're going to look at today. All right, and I'm going to be kind of using some of my own notes and relying on your textbook as well. I've got my pocket Constitution. So, okay, basically, the final article of the Constitution provided that it would become effective upon ratification, not by the unanimous consent of the 13 legislatures, which, remember, that was a shortcoming of the Articles of Confederation, but by at least 9 states ratifying state ratifying conventions specially elected for that purpose. So if we look together at the very last article of the Constitution, and if you have yours at home, which perhaps you do, you may look at it. It's on page 16 in here. Article, and it is 7. The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. 9 states. 9 states. Let's see here. Ratify. This word means to approve, to accept formally, legally. That's what that word means, to ratify. We always talk of ratifying an amendment, ratifying a treaty. Okay? And so the date that the Confederation Congress is going to submit the Constitution to the states is September 28th, 1787. All right. Now, this is the first time in world history that all the different sorts of people making up a large nation were able to discuss, debate, and decide by a peaceful vote how they would be governed. So I can't make enough of how important that is, because usually you just have a new king or a new czar, and those things are settled sometimes, the line of succession behind closed doors. The people aren't privy to what's going on. This is the first time in history this has been done. I can't put too fine a point on how important that is. All right. And so there's going to be a fierce political debate that ensues. And you're going to have 2 groups here, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So the Federalists, they're going to be those who advocate to support basically the current Constitution that's been drafted. They like it pretty well, okay? They're going to advocate to support a system where several states are under a central authority. Basically, you could say these are the guys who aren't as afraid of centralized authority. They're not as afraid of a king, not a king, but they're not as afraid of a tyrant taking control. They seem to have more faith in the system that's been set up, the checks and balances, the separation of powers that we've talked about. And they also believed in a centralized national government with strong fiscal roots. And you may say, well, what does that mean? That means that they wanted like a strong national bank. So some kind of national treasury where you're going to have that money for wars, for national emergencies. And I want you to think about something really quickly. Pardon me while I take a drink here. I want you to think about something. We're currently in a national emergency, are we not? So some of you at home, maybe your parents are working from home. Some of you, if your parents are small business owners, maybe they've had to close down their businesses. And you know, I know a couple of you, your mother works at a nail salon. You have to close that down. Your mother does hair, things like that, these businesses that can't be open. And that affects the economy. And I'm sure you've heard your parents talk, or you've seen on the news or read in a newspaper that the American people have been given some money back from the government to help us through these hard times. But the whole idea is that if there is some kind of national emergency, there would be centralized money that would help. So these people, the Federalists, they want a strong national bank, and they aren't afraid of a strong centralized government. And so who are these guys? Typically younger men who made their fortunes during the Revolutionary War. And if you think about it, in history, younger men, they're more likely to be a part of revolutions, young unmarried men. They're more likely to be a part of revolutions. They're more likely to join groups to overthrow the czar or things like that because they don't have as much to lose. They're more willing to take risks, one might say. So examples that we know of here, your boy Alexander Hamilton, he was a Federalist. In particular, he really supported the idea of a strong national bank. James Madison, father of the Constitution, he supported, and he was a young man at this time, the idea of the current Constitution. And also John Jay, who will in the future, you'll remember his name. He was one of the commissioners to the Treaty of Paris, to the Paris peace talks. But he'll be a future Supreme Court justice. All right, so those are the Federalists. Now the Anti-Federalists, they are going to, they're not as much going to like the Constitution as it is set up. And the reason why is because it doesn't have a Bill of Rights. And they're also afraid of, they're much more afraid of a tyrant. Excuse me. Children, I am taping a lecture. I'm going to ask you not to shout at each other. I hope they're talking to each other. I heard someone say, no, you aren't. Okay, going back. The Anti-Federalists, and a door slam. Oh, they're going to get it later. They're going to get it, aren't they, guys? Okay. The Anti-Federalists, again, they're going to oppose, they're more fearful of a strong executive. They're more fearful of another King George type just coming in and taking over. They're more fearful of the creation of a stronger U.S. federal government. They opposed ratifying the 1787 U.S. Constitution. Now, one thing I want you to understand, though, is these guys, the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, they're disagreeing on small particulars, but they want the same end result. So don't think of this as being huge ideological, that means idea-based, a huge idea-based divide. No, they're just particulars they're disagreeing on. So these are going to be men who are more established in their careers, a little older, more cautious, such as Patrick Henry. Remember Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death? George Mason. They also fear that state power is threatened by a national government. They're more nervous about the idea of a national bank, okay? And so they are the Anti-Federalists. They're the whole reason we have a Bill of Rights. So I'll talk to you about that compromise in a minute. But let's talk about, for a moment, how these two groups fought. Did they tar and feather each other? Excuse me. I would like you and your sister to be quiet, please. I am filming a lecture. Go up and be quiet. Thank you. Got it. Okay. So, did they tar and feather each other? Did they duke it out in the streets? No, it's have you ever heard the expression the pen is mightier than the sword? They fought it out through writing. They fought it out in newspapers. All right. And you guys know how I love good newspaper writing. So a fierce political debate ensued where again the Federalists, the Anti-Federalists, they debated over the ratification of the Constitution using heated words many times. At times, apparently, there was some violence, but mostly this took place in newspapers. The newspapers aggressively took sides. Readership soared. One thing you guys will see when you get to the era of Teddy Roosevelt, yellow journalism, is newspapermen, they make quite a living out of whipping up the public about issues. And so here newspaper readership is going to soar. Just kind of an example, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but when you're watching maybe a television show with your family at night, there'll be a commercial, And every commercial now has to mention the coronavirus, right? It's like, Lysol, we're all in this together. State Farm, we're all in this together. And my middle son, who's more cynical, he'll say, isn't it great how they're manipulating this whole issue to try to sell their product, which there's something to that. And of course, to be mature though, we understand you kind of can't ignore what's going on in our world, right? So it's a combination, these newspaper guys and modern advertisers, of opportunism, right? Seeing an opportunity, and also, doing your job, which is wanting to sell things, bring the people information or insurance or cleansing wipes, whatever the case may be. Okay, so let's see. One person, in fact, said newspapers were being read more than the Bible. So you can imagine people were very into this. And let's see. Many disputes. Let's see. Okay. So let's see. What I wanted to talk to you about is how they fought this out for a moment. There's a collection of essays called the Federalist Papers, and then a collection, the Anti-Federalists. And these different gentlemen who were writing on behalf of whether we should ratify this new constitution or not, they published their writings under pen names or pseudonyms. And I see on my shelf here a copy of the Anti-Federalist. I looked around earlier for a copy of the Federalist. My books are in boxes all over the place. But let me grab the Anti-Federalist really quickly. So, oops, dropped that. Okay, the Anti-Federalist, and as you can see, this is my college copy, and I put a Barbie sticker on it because I've always been whimsical. I have a lot of whimsy. All right, so you should see my copy of the Federalist. There are heart stickers around Alexander Hamilton, but he's the one who put them there, not me. Okay, so basically they wrote these different essays addressing each other's arguments, and let's talk about some of those arguments, okay? So, among the supreme legacies of the debate over the Constitution is the Federalist, a collection of essays originally published in New York newspapers between 1787 and 1788. Now, these were started by Alexander Hamilton, and he and James Madison published under the name and John J. Publius, which, if you know from your Latin, means public, okay? And so, Hamilton wrote about 50, Madison wrote about 30 of these essays, John Jay wrote about 5. They were written in support of ratification, as we know, defending the principle of a supreme national authority, while reassuring doubters that the people and the states had little reason to fear tyranny in the new federal government. In perhaps the most famous Federalist essay, essay number 10, Madison argued that the very size and diversity of the expanding U.S. would make it impossible for a single faction to form a majority that could dominate the government. So think about this. One thing talked about or heard about is the tyranny of the majority. This is something that the people are afraid of. On one hand, you're afraid of a strong leader who takes too much power and abuses that power and takes the rights from the people, right? Or gets in the way of the people having their rights. On the other hand, they're very much afraid of democracy with a small d, the idea of the people directly ruling themselves. They saw that as a step away from mob rule, that the people needed some kind of intermediary between themselves and the government. That is representative government, okay? So we hear the tyranny of the majority, okay? And so, basically, what was argued in the Federalist Papers is that the United States is so large and diverse. How could it even be possible for a majority faction, and a faction is a group, to develop? How could that be possible? People have such different interests. And I want you to think about that for a moment, okay? We know what regionalism is, right? And you know how you can tell by the way someone speaks or dresses, that, or what they think is in style. That is kind of a taste of the region they're from. People are different. When we moved back to Colorado a couple years ago, I remember being surprised by how many people were covered in tattoos. That hadn't been the case when we lived there in the early 2000s, but a lot of people had moved there from California and New York because of a business, and so that's something you don't see here in Texas as much. And I mean like all over the legs tattoo, not just one secret flaming skull on your bicep. No. Okay, making sure that my camera kind of will pause for a moment. I hope that you're able to see this smoothly and clearly. So something that reminded me a lot of the region I'm from, and I'm from farmland in Ohio, was a video a girl I went to high school with posted on Facebook. Maybe you've seen videos like this where it'll show someone throwing a ball and then someone catching it, but they're not together. And it was meant to kind of raise the spirits of the girls' softball team because they're not having a season, right? And this took place in my hometown. And my friend has a daughter who plays softball, and she's a guidance counselor at a local high school. And if you look at the background, these girls are all playing in front of fields. There are barns in the background, open, wide spaces. And I just thought, wow, that is where I am from 100%. Farmland, people taking animals to the fair, etc. I know you have a group like that here. And you may think, Mrs. Moore, why are you digressing so much? Why are you talking about farms? Are you lonesome for cornfields? Yes, I am. I am lonesome for cornfields. I miss Ohio, sometimes I admit. But I mention it because people are so different. Those tattooed people in Colorado, they're not going to necessarily want the same things as those, no ma'am, go away please. They're not going to want the same things as those girls playing softball in the middle of a cornfield. And they won't even want the same thing as people living in New York or people in Texas who are interested in the oil industry. You see, everyone's going to have a different interest. There's no way that oil industry group of Texas is going to dominate the entire country, or the tattoo group is going to dominate the entire country, or the farm girls. They're not going to dominate either. People have different interests. So he's saying the size, Madison here, I believe, is saying the size of the country is going to keep that from happening. Don't be fearful of people oppressing rights coming together in large groups because we have such a large, diverse country. All right. So, and the country will only grow with manifest destiny. All right. So, let's see. Let's talk about the Bill of Rights. So, I think you all had to memorize the Bill of Rights last year, and you understand that you have different things like the right to free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of presses, the right to bear arms, all of these, the right to a trial by jury, things like that. Okay, we know many of these things. Now, the Anti-Federalists insisted upon the Bill of Rights because they were fearful of the rights of the people being oppressed. They were fearful that any right not expressed explicitly, written down, enumerated, and enumerated means numbered, that the people wouldn't be protected. However, the argument of the Federalists was the moment you write down a right, you are saying the rights you're not writing down don't exist for the people. You see, and that's a problem too. Think in terms of your parents go out and they say to you, now you may not use the oven or light matches, and I also want you to stay in the house. And so you don't do those things, but what do you do instead? You go in your parents' room and you decide to finger paint on their bed, jump up and down. You drink all the Cokes in the house and get a little crazy. You bring the hose in the house, wash the dog, you know, weird stuff like that. And your parents come home and they go, oh my gosh. And you're like, but hey, Mom, I didn't use the stove and I didn't light matches and whatever that last thing I said was. You also made a lot of long distance calls. So think about that. It's the idea of what you don't say explicitly, I'm going to do anyway. Or with rights, if you don't say I have these rights, does that mean I don't have them? Do you see? So this is the argument. I don't feel like my metaphor is perfect, but I think you know what I'm talking about. So, the Bill of Rights. One thing that is important to note, it is the 10th Amendment, which is kind of the great compromise for the Federalists, which says that any rights, yes, where are we at? There we go. No? Okay. Sorry, guys. Here we are. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So that's a compromise in the Bill of Rights. Okay? So the idea that rights not specifically stated in the Bill of Rights in the Constitution belong to the states, and if they're not stated to the states by their constitutions, then the rights belong to the people. Kind of the great, it's like if your parent then said, don't do anything while I'm gone, and you know what I mean. Don't tick me off. That can cover a lot of ground, okay? So, you need to look at the Bill of Rights as a compromise, which is what made the Anti-Federalists okay with the Constitution, and that's how it got to be ratified. There's something I want to tell you that I think is kind of interesting. And so, floss alert. I've been told that when I mention anything that makes me look fancy, I'm flossing, so floss alert. My husband went to the University of Chicago, and this is the late 1980s, and he was in a class on federalism and anti-federalism. And sitting Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was coming to speak at the college, or the university, excuse me. And he came into their class and did a surprise lecture. Very cool, right? And basically, he talked about the idea that the founders talked and debated so much over the Bill of Rights. They didn't flesh out enough of the details in the Constitution itself, which left the future Supreme Court justices one heck of a large job in interpreting the Constitution. So, just to make sure you understand what I'm saying again, sitting Supreme Court justice says they shouldn't have been talking as much about the Bill of Rights. They ended up kind of ignoring the Constitution in a lot of their arguments instead. So, I'm going to ask you to go upstairs, please. Thank you. Okay. So, now my dog is barking. That was not a popular thing to say for a sitting Supreme Court justice, by the way. Okay. I think that this may be a good place to stop. And next time, I would like to talk to you about how the states individually ratified the Constitution. So thank you, and until next time, toodaloo.